Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Is Aryan Khan owed an apology and is he also owed compensation? How has the National Narcotics Bureau acquitted itself in handling this case? And perhaps most importantly, from the point of view of a journalist, how has the media acquitted itself covering this case? Those are three key issues I shall raise today with one of India's foremost lawyers, Prashant Bhushan, who joins us live from Palampur. Prashant Bhushan, let's start with Aryan Khan. He's a 24, 25-year-old young boy, yet he was arrested and kept in jail for almost 4 weeks. He was accused of being part of an international drugs cartel. He was accused of peddling drugs, and there's no proof whatsoever for any of those charges. In fact, in the end, the NCB wasn't even able to charge him. Yet he went through nearly 4 weeks in jail. He suffered the mental trauma of the humiliation of being discussed on television every single night. Does he therefore deserve an apology? Does he deserve compensation?
I think he deserves more than merely an apology and more than just compensation. I think the officers of the Narcotics Control Bureau who were in charge and who were involved in incarcerating him as well as defaming him and falsely defaming him, and it's very clear now that it was all mala fide, they ought to be prosecuted for malicious prosecution. That's an offense under the penal code, and they can certainly be prosecuted if it is quite clear that it was malicious, and you cannot pass it off as an inadvertent mistake or a bona fide error. So therefore, he not only is owed an apology, he is not only owed compensation for not just his incarceration, but his defamation, for the mental trauma, that psychological trauma that has been caused to him and his family. But I feel that the officers in charge need to be prosecuted for malicious prosecution, and the media who went after him hammer and tongs and clearly with malicious intent ought to be prosecuted for criminal and civil defamation.
You've made many points there. Let me take them up one by one. S.N. Pradhan, who is the Director General of the NCB, admitted on public television yesterday, number one, that there were irregularities. Number two, he said there were lapses. Number three, he said action will be taken against investigators. The one investigator who attracted enormous public attention was the person who was heading the original investigation, Sameer Wankhede. When you say that the investigators should be prosecuted, do you have Sameer Wankhede in mind?
Yes, Sameer Wankhede for sure, because he was the spearhead of this malicious prosecution. It's not merely an inadvertent error that he committed. It was quite clearly malicious, because you cannot go to town and arrest a person for being in possession of drugs or being part of an international drug cartel without having any evidence whatsoever of the same. So therefore, this was clearly malicious, and therefore clearly Sameer Wankhede is not only deserves departmental administrative action, which his successor is now promising to take against him, but he also needs to be prosecuted for malicious prosecution. You see, unfortunately, in India, this malicious prosecution is hardly ever used, and that is why there are a large number of investigating agencies, not just the NCB, including the NIA, this Enforcement Directorate, and sometimes even the CBI, who have been used, especially by this government, to maliciously persecute and prosecute totally innocent people. And this malicious persecution or prosecution will only stop if some of these people who are involved in it are brought to account. Of course, they are doing it at the behest of their political masters, but they need to be told that you cannot. You are an agency who is supposed to enforce the law. You are not supposed to act at the behest of your political masters, whatever may be the pressure on you. And therefore, if you do that, you will be liable, and you will be prosecuted for malicious prosecution. And once some of them are prosecuted in that way and brought to book, then only this misuse and abuse of authority by these investigating agencies will stop.
On that particular point, that people like Wankhede, maybe not just Wankhede, but others as well, should be prosecuted for malicious prosecution, who should actually bring that case? Should it be the authorities, the department he works for, the government of India, the state government, or could it also be Aryan Khan himself?
Well, actually, ideally, it should be the authorities. As the current director is saying that the officers, there may be departmental action against the officers. They should also initiate criminal proceedings for malicious prosecution against these officers. But unfortunately, it is unrealistic to expect that they will do it, given the kind of political pressure that they will be under. So, in that case, Aryan Khan himself can file an FIR, can lodge an FIR for malicious prosecution. And if the investigating agency, in this case, it may be the regular police, which can prosecute the offense of investigate and prosecute the offense of malicious prosecution. If they don't do it, then he can go to the court and ask for a special investigating team or some independent agency which can be independent of the NCB and its political masters, who can do that job.
One quick question on the same point about malicious prosecution. Would you advise Aryan Khan to go ahead and maliciously prosecute this man? Or do you think, given the way these cases can run for decades, he'll end up creating a bigger problem for himself?
Well, unfortunately, given the practical reality of our system today, it is not very likely that this kind of action of his suing them or seeking their investigation and prosecution for malicious prosecution is likely to succeed. And therefore, I doubt that he will go that way, go that route. But certainly, this is something that a person like Aryan Khan or an empowered and well-known person like him ought to be doing. Because unless some of these officers are brought to book, this kind of malicious prosecution, which is rampant today, absolutely rampant, especially under this government. If you see the Bhima Koregaon cases or even the Delhi riots cases, so many totally innocent people are being maliciously prosecuted and are being kept in jail for years altogether. I mean,
Sure.
Aryan was lucky that he was released in 4 weeks, but there are people in the Bhima Koregaon case or in the Delhi riots case, like Umar Khalid, etc., who are totally innocent, totally maliciously prosecuted, and they are in jail for years altogether.
Absolutely. This is a much bigger problem than just Aryan Khan. But as you said, an example needs to be set. The first instance of someone being successfully maliciously prosecuted will mean that this will ensure that thereafter officers are very careful about overreaching themselves, very careful about following orders which they know are wrong. Let's come back, however, to the Aryan Khan case, and let's come back in particular to S.N. Pradhan, the Director General of the NCB. As I said earlier, he said at his public press conference that there were irregularities, there were lapses, that action would be taken against investigators. But, and this is my question, when NDTV asked him whether the arrest of Aryan Khan was justified, this was his reply. I'm quoting, "In investigation, subsequent facts clear up the matter, so I won't jump to blame the initial investigation." Now, to me, that sounds like a complete contradiction. On the one hand, he says, I won't jump to blame the initial investigation, but just before that, at a press conference, he said that the initial investigation had irregularities, it had lapses, that action would be taken against investigators. What do you make of this perplexing answer.
No, it's not perplexing given the kind of political pressure that he would be under. So he's been kind of forced not to charge Aryan Khan because there was absolutely no evidence against him. But of course, we have seen that there is absolutely no evidence against people like Umar Khalid or these Bhima Koregaon accused like Sudha Bharadwaj, etc. And yet they are charged. So, I mean, to the credit of Mr. Pradhan, he has at least not gone that route. He could have gone that route by charging Aryan Khan even without any evidence. He has not done that. But he is not brave enough to be able to say that the initial arrest was wrong and Sameer Wankhede and his team need to be charged for that. Not just wrong, it was malicious. You see, this business of arresting people immediately after starting the investigation is a totally wrong system which has been in vogue. You arrest a person only if and during investigation, or even during the certainly during investigation, you do not, or you should not arrest a person merely because there is some suspicion of his being involved in a crime. You arrest him only when three conditions are present. A, if he is not arrested, he will flee. B, if he is not arrested, he will tamper with evidence. C, if he is not arrested, he will he'll continue to commit similar crimes which are heinous in nature. Now, none of these three facts were present in Aryan Khan's case, or even in the cases of many others who are arrested at the drop of a hat immediately after registering an FIR. So the whole system of arrests has gone completely haywire.
Absolutely. But let me underline the point you made at the beginning of that answer. What Mr. Pradhan has done, and this is where he does deserve credit, is that he's accepted and admitted there were irregularities, there were lapses, and that action needs to be taken against investigators. But where he lacked bravery, to use your phrase, was to then conclude that the arrest was unjustified and wrong. And where he should have gone but didn't go was to say, I therefore apologize to Aryan Khan on behalf of the NCB for the trauma and the suffering that he has been unjustifiably caused. He therefore lacked bravery to say that the arrest was wrong, and he lacked the moral courage to go that one step further to say, I apologize for what happened to you. Let me come at this point to another aspect of the way the NCB handled the matter. I'm talking about the leaks. During the 26 days that Aryan Khan was in jail, there was a ceaseless flow of leaks accusing him of being involved in an international cartel, accusing him at times of being involved in a conspiracy, though no further details of that were given to anyone, accusing him of peddling drugs, though there was no evidence. None of this was justified. This was drip-fed to the media regularly. Now, we have no proof that it was done by the NCB, but there's no one else in the world who would be doing it. So what do you make about this method of handling people who you have arrested, creating false suspicion and unjustified speculation about them? And again, it's not just Aryan Khan to whom this has happened. It's happened in multiple other cases as well. What about this aspect of the handling of this case?
See, this is a classic case of what I consider civil and criminal defamation by the media. Now, the defense that the media takes in such cases is that this is the official press release of the investigating agency, and even if the investigating agency is doing a dishonest job, we are duty bound to report what a government or a official investigating agency is doing. This is the normal defense that the media takes. But that defense will not be available when the media is not relying upon official statements and official press releases of the investigating agency, and is only using what they call leaks, etc. So therefore, clearly the media will also be liable in this case for civil as well as criminal defamation. And therefore, I believe that action needs to be taken against these media organizations, because this is a standard pattern that we are seeing in the media, especially the media which we called Godi media or the lapdog media, which is acting as a tool of propaganda in the hands of the government. The government wanted Aryan Khan to be defamed because he is a Muslim. It was part of the government strategy to spread hatred against Muslims, and the lapdog media, which was sort of sitting in the lap of the government and lapping up these so-called leaks, etc., from a dishonest NCB headed by Sameer Wankhede, was doing the hit job of the government. And in my view, they are clearly liable for both civil and criminal defamation. It will be no defense on their part to say that they were relying on leaks from the investigating agency, because it is their duty then to check the veracity of what is being fed to them. Even if the investigating agency, that is the NCB, was feeding them this kind of these malicious and false stories, it was their duty to cross-check them. They can't just like mouthing a defamatory statement by just saying that somebody else has told me this. If it is clearly false and defamatory, it is no defense to say that somebody else has told me this. But yes, you can rely upon an official media press release. In my view, even that needs to be stopped. In my view, it should be the duty of the media to carry out due diligence before even saying something which is defamatory merely because it is being said by some investigating agency.
I accept every point you made about the media. I'll only add that it wasn't just what we call the Godi media that was sensationalizing and feeding off the story. Sadly, every channel, every newspaper in the country was. Some were clever enough to hold the discussion but disbelieve the allegation. Nonetheless, whether they were believing the allegation or disbelieving the allegation, they were discussing it and promoting it and making it better known. And the consequence for the young man concerned remained the same, the humiliation of that allegation which is false being discussed. But I want to ask you this, and I'll come back to the NCB in a moment's time. Would you advise Aryan Khan to bring prosecution either for civil or criminal defamation against the media?
I would certainly advise him, because he is a person who's fairly influential. He has the resources, and therefore it is only people like him who can bring that action and take it to its logical conclusion. And I would certainly recommend that he should do that, because unless some people are made accountable for this kind of malicious prosecution, defamation, etc., this will not stop. This is just going on rampantly, and people feel that they can get away with murder, and therefore they continue doing it.
One more point about the NCB, because the drip feeding of allegation, of malicious fabricated stories designed to humiliate, designed to deliberately paint Aryan in a bad light, that drip feed came from the NCB. In other circumstances, the CBI has behaved in this way. In other circumstances, I imagine the ED has behaved in this way. What do you make of state authorities, state institutions deliberately drip feeding fabricated malicious stories? After all, when an investigation is underway, is it legitimate? Is it morally right that they should be leaking what they have not even substantiated but are at best only suspecting? What about that wider point about the behavior of institutions?
No, it is totally wrong. It is not only wrong, in my view. I mean, the officers should be liable for both departmental action as well as they have clearly committed the offense of defamation. If they are leaking and planting stories with the media which are defamatory in nature, then the officers are, it is no defense for them to say that no, we were investigating. It's not their job to feed the media or give selective leaks to the media. They can issue an official press release in a matter of great public importance but only stick to facts which they clearly know and which they can clearly establish. It is not their business to leak false and malicious and defamatory uh, 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 innuendos against people to the media, and therefore they are guilty. Both, they should be liable for departmental action as well as civil and criminal defamation.
Two last questions before I end, and they really are to do with lessons that we should learn, or rather, our system should learn after this very sad, sorry experience we've been through. Do you believe we need a statutory right to compensation for wrongful arrest? Many countries like the UK, Britain, Germany, Canada, New Zealand, perhaps even Australia, have a statutory right for compensation for wrongful conviction. But I'm talking not about wrongful conviction. I'm talking about wrongful arrest, because that is far more common in India.
No, I think there is already, I mean, it is possible to ask for compensation under the existing laws as well. But in my view, yes, there should be implanted in the statute a specific provision saying that if a person has been wrongly prosecuted, wrongly subjected to arrests, etc., then he needs to be compensated for that. He or she needs to be compensated for that. I think that should be an explicit law which should be implanted in our legal provisions.
Secondly, and lastly, after this experience, should judges, perhaps the Supreme Court itself, lay down that whilst institutions, authorities, and prosecuting agencies or investigating agencies have the power to arrest, that doesn't mean they should exercise it without deliberately, carefully ensuring that they have the evidence to back it up. At the moment, at the very first hint of suspicion, which could be unfounded, the first reaction is to arrest. Do we need the court to say, you need to think and pause very carefully before you exercise a power? Don't exercise it just because you have it.
Well, they have said that in at least a few judgments, just as in Kedarnath, they laid down that you cannot charge somebody for sedition unless there is incitement to violence or to public disorder. But unfortunately, these kind of judicial pronouncements are not, firstly, not known to many police officers. Secondly, they are often not followed, etc. You see, unless the Supreme Court makes an example of some of these officers, Supreme Court or High Courts make an example of some of these officers who carry out these kind of either malicious or even highly negligent arrests in such circumstances in violation of the law and the judgments of the law declared by the Supreme Court or the judgments of the Supreme Court, some of these officers need to be made accountable in at least some egregious cases. Then only there will be greater public awareness, and the police training academies will also inform these people that, look, this is what the Supreme Court has laid down regarding arrests. You cannot arrest a person merely because you have registered an FIR against him. These are the only three conditions in which you arrest a person during investigation or even during prosecution. That's why the rule is bail, not jail. And bail is granted if none of those three things which are required for making an arrest are present. If those three things...
This is why you believe that the prosecution of officers, I'll take Sameer Wankhede simply as an example. He's not the only one in this case or in other cases that needs to be made an example of. But you're saying the prosecution of such officers who've acted wrongly is essential, whether it's prosecution for malicious prosecution or whether it's prosecution for criminal and civil defamation. It's only when, to use a colloquial phrase, an example has been made of people who've acted high-handedly and wrongly, that the fear of life will be put into others, and this will stop. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Prashant Bhushan, thank you very much for this interview. I'm grateful that you made time for me. Take care. Stay safe.
Thanks, Karan.